The morning sun crept through the blinds of Aaliyah Jackson's bedroom in Laurel Creek, Tennessee, casting thin golden stripes across her neatly made bed. At 16, she'd grown accustomed to the quiet rhythm of this small southern town, where the air smelled of pine and the murmur of the Cumberland River was never far off. Her alarm buzzed at 6:30 sharp, but she was already awake, reaching for her phone with a practiced flick. A notification blinked, a voice message from her dad, Colonel Marcus Jackson, his deep voice cutting through the stillness. "Morning, Firefly," he said, the nickname warming her despite the crackle of a distant time zone. "Got your debate today, right? Keep your cool, speak sharp, and don't let 'em rattle you. Wish I could be there, but this mission's, well, make me proud, love you." Aaliyah smiled, a pang of longing tugging at her chest. Marcus's deployments were a constant shadow, classified, unpredictable. But this one felt heavier, shrouded in silence. She rolled out of bed, stretching in the soft glow of dawn, her room a snapshot of her life. Family photos pinned to the wall, academic plaques gleaming beside a faded Green Beret patch her dad had given her years ago. Today was big. The debate at Laurel Creek High on police reform, a topic that hit close to home in a town where power often wore a badge. Aaliyah dressed with care. Navy sweater, jeans, simple but sharp, her mind already running through her arguments. Downstairs, her mom, Tamara, sipped coffee over patient charts, her nurse's scrubs crisp against the kitchen's warm chaos. "Nervous?" Tamara asked, glancing up. Aaliyah poured orange juice, nodding. "A little. Dad's okay, though. He sent a message." Tamara's eyes softened. "He'll be home soon, baby. Need a ride?" "Nah," Aaliyah said. "I'll walk." "Clears my head." She grabbed her backpack, stepping into the crisp spring air, unaware that the day ahead would ignite a fire she couldn't extinguish. The walk to Laurel Creek High was a quiet ritual, the late March breeze rustling the budding oaks along Main Street. Aaliyah mentally rehearsed her points, statistics on police misconduct, stories she'd heard from neighbors about unchecked power. But the peace shattered as she neared the school. Cody Hensley lounged by the entrance, his blonde hair catching the sun, surrounded by his usual pack of loudmouths. "My Uncle Roy practically owns this town," he bragged, voice carrying like a challenge. "Dad says he's got more pull than the mayor. Last week he stopped some dude from the Hollows. Guy mouthed off, so Uncle Roy just laughed and doubled the ticket." His crew snickered, but Aaliyah's jaw tightened. Roy Hensley, the sheriff, was a name whispered with both fear and resentment around here. She slipped past, head down, aiming for the debate room. By afternoon, the classroom buzzed with tension. Mrs. Hargrove, their teacher, called the topic, "Police Reform in America." Aaliyah's team argued for oversight, Cody's against. She stood, nerves fading as she laid out her case. Data, real cases, a plea for accountability. The room hushed, impressed, until Cody's turn. "Cops are the line between order and chaos," he sneered, veering off script. "Maybe if some people respected authority, we wouldn't have issues." His eyes flicked to Aaliyah, venomous. She fired back, calm but cutting. "When your uncle brags about harassing folks in the Hollows, that's not law. It's bullying." Cody's face went crimson. The class erupted in murmurs. Mrs. Hargrove named Aaliyah's team the winners, but as kids filed out, Cody cornered her at her locker. "You had no right dragging Uncle Roy into this," he hissed, grabbing her wrist. Instinct kicked in. Marcus's training. In one fluid twist, she flipped him onto the tiles, his gasp echoing as a crowd froze, wide-eyed. She walked away, heart pounding, not knowing she'd just lit the fuse to a war. The late afternoon sun dipped low over Laurel Creek, painting the sky in streaks of orange as Aaliyah trudged home from school. The weight of the day clung to her, the debate victory, Cody's humiliated glare, the way she'd flipped him onto the hallway floor. Each moment replaying in her mind like a scratch record. Her sneakers crunched against the gravel of Oak Road, a quiet stretch lined with towering oaks and modest homes, when the rumble of an engine broke her thoughts. A police cruiser rolled up beside her, slow and deliberate, its black paint glinting ominously in the fading light. The window slid down, revealing Sheriff Roy Hensley, his square jaw set tight, eyes cold as steel. Beside him sat Deputy Lena Carver, her face unreadable, fingers tapping the dashboard. "Ms. Jackson," Roy drawled, his voice thick with mock courtesy, loud enough to carry across the empty street. "Heard you had quite a day. Gave my nephew a little tumble, huh?" Aaliyah stopped, squaring her shoulders, her pulse quickening. "He grabbed me first," she said, firm but cautious. Roy chuckled, a low, dangerous sound, and stepped out of the cruiser, his boots hitting the ground with a thud. Lena followed, hesitating as she glanced around. "That's not what I heard," Roy said, unscrewing the cap of a water bottle he'd pulled from his belt. "Sounds like you're a troublemaker who don't know her place." Before Aaliyah could react, he tipped the bottle, pouring a slow, deliberate stream over her head. The cold water soaked her hair, ran down her neck, drenched her sweater. She gasped, frozen in shock, as Roy smirked, his eyes gleaming with cruel satisfaction. "Oops," he said, tossing the empty bottle aside. "Guess I slipped." From across the street, hidden behind the lace curtains of her weathered porch, Miss Clara Thompson watched, her gnarled hands gripping a smartphone. The old woman's eyes, sharp despite her years, narrowed as she recorded every second. Roy's taunting grin, the water dripping from Aaliyah's chin. Lena's uneasy shift in stance. Clara's breath hitched. She'd seen this before, decades ago, when Roy had been a young deputy breaking folks who dared to cross him. Back then, she'd stayed silent, her voice stolen by fear. Not today. The video captured Roy leaning close, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "This town's got rules, girl. My rules. Your soldier daddy ain't here to save you." Aaliyah stood still, water pooling at her feet, her fists clenched but unmoving. She met his gaze, defiance flickering through her shock. "You're a disgrace," she said, barely audible, her words slicing through the humid air. Roy's smirk vanished, replaced by a flash of rage, but he stepped back, gesturing to Lena. "Let's roll. She'll learn soon enough." The cruiser peeled away, leaving Aaliyah trembling, a mix of fury and humiliation coursing through her. She wiped her face, her breath ragged, and started walking again. Faster now, the damp chill seeping into her bones. She didn't notice Clara slipping back inside, her video already uploading to a cloud she'd set up years ago for moments just like this. Proof, when the time came. At home, Aaliyah slipped in quietly, avoiding Tamara's worried eyes in the kitchen. She locked herself in the bathroom, staring at her reflection, water still clinging to her lashes. Something shifted inside her, a spark, not of fear, but of resolve. Roy had lit a match, but he didn't know he'd just handed her the fuel to burn his world down. The next morning broke over Laurel Creek with a heavy stillness, the kind that settles after a storm you didn't see coming. Aaliyah woke to the faint hum of her ceiling fan, her damp sweater from yesterday still crumpled in the hamper. She'd barely slept, Roy Hensley's cold eyes haunting her dreams, his water-soaked taunt replaying like a looped tape. Downstairs, Tamara was already in the kitchen, her nurse's scrubs swapped for a faded apron as she scrambled eggs. "You're quiet," she said, sliding a plate across the counter. Aaliyah shrugged, pushing the food around. "Just tired." She didn't mention the sheriff, didn't want to see the worry crease her mom's face when Marcus was half a world away, but the truth gnawed at her. Roy wouldn't stop with a splash of water. By noon, the whispers started at school. Kids she'd known since kindergarten shot her sideways glances, their hushed voices buzzing with lies. Rumors that she'd attacked Cody unprovoked, that she had a history from some non-existent old school. Aaliyah found Zoe, her best friend, by the lockers. "They're saying Roy's got proof you're trouble," Zoe murmured, eyes wide. "It's all over Snapchat." Aaliyah's stomach twisted, but she forced a nod. "He's lying. Let him talk." That evening, as she walked home down Oak Road, the air felt thicker, the shadows longer. Then she saw it, a police cruiser idling at the corner, headlights off, Roy's silhouette unmistakable behind the wheel. He didn't move, didn't speak, just watched, a predator sizing up prey. Her pulse hammered, but she kept walking, chin up, refusing to give him the fear he craved. Back home, she locked the door, the cruiser's engine still echoing in her ears, a promise of worse to come. The knock came just as dusk painted Laurel Creek in shades of gray, a soft but insistent rap at the front door. Aaliyah peeked through the blinds, expecting Roy's smug face, but instead saw Miss Clara Thompson, her silver hair glowing under the porch light. The old woman clutched a shawl tight around her thin shoulders, her eyes darting nervously up the street where the cruiser had lingered. "Let me in, child," she whispered when Aaliyah opened the door. Inside, Clara sank into the couch, pulling a cracked smartphone from her purse. "I saw what he did yesterday," she said, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and resolve. "Sheriff Hensley poured that water on you like you were nothing. I got it all right here." She tapped the screen, showing grainy footage of Roy's cruelty, Aaliyah's defiant stance captured in shaky pixels. Aaliyah's breath caught. Proof, real proof, from someone she barely knew. "Why'd you record it?" she asked. Clara's gaze hardened. 20 years back, Roy took my store from me. False charges, trumped-up fines. I stayed quiet then. Not this time. She pressed the phone into Aaliyah's hands. "Keep your head up, girl. He's a bully, but bullies fall." After Clara left, Aaliyah sat alone replaying the video, the spark inside her flaring brighter. But later that night, as Tamara slept, a rustle outside snapped her awake. She crept to the window, heart pounding. There in the mailbox, a crumpled note in jagged scrawl. "Shut your mouth or your family pays." Roy's cruiser rolled by again, slow and silent, headlights off, a ghost in the dark. Aaliyah clutched the note, fear warring with fury. He was closing in, but so was she, and soon Marcus would be home to tip the scales. The third morning after Roy's water-soaked warning dawned gray and restless over Laurel Creek, a thin mist curling around the pines like a shroud. Aaliyah sat at the kitchen table, her untouched cereal growing soggy as she stared at the note from the mailbox. "Shut your mouth or your family pays." Its jagged letters burned into her mind. She hadn't told Tamara yet. Her mom's shifts at the hospital were brutal enough without this weight. The cruiser's nightly prowls had become a grim routine, its shadow haunting the edge of their yard. But today felt different, heavier, like the air before a storm breaks. Aaliyah's phone buzzed with Clara's video, a lifeline she clutched tight, though it couldn't stop the dread creeping up her spine. Then came the sound, heavy boots on the porch, a rhythm she'd know anywhere. The front door swung open, and there stood Colonel Marcus Jackson, his duffel bag hitting the floor with a dull thud. 6 feet of lean muscle, his buzz cut flecked with gray, he filled the doorway like a wall against the world. Tamara rushed from the kitchen, her gasp turning to a sob as she threw her arms around him. Aaliyah followed, burying her face in his chest, the scent of jet fuel and cologne grounding her racing heart. "Surprise," Marcus said, his voice a low rumble, but his sharp eyes caught the tension in the room. He pulled back, cupping Aaliyah's face, and froze. Faint bruises circled her wrist, a ghost of Cody's grip. His smile vanished, replaced by a cold, quiet fury she'd seen only once before, when a neighbor's pit bull had lunged at her years ago. "What happened?" he asked, his tone deceptively calm, a predator sizing up the hunt. "Let's sit, Dad," Aaliyah said, guiding Marcus to the couch, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside. Tamara hovered nearby, her hands twisting a dish towel as Aaliyah began. She spilled it all. The debate, Cody's attack, Roy's water-soaked humiliation on Oak Road, the rumors, the cruiser stalking their street. The note still crumpled in her pocket. With each word, Marcus's face stayed stone still, but his eyes darkened, a quiet rage simmering beneath the surface. When she showed him Clara's video, the sheriff's sneering face filling the screen, he leaned forward, elbows on knees, absorbing every detail like a tactician mapping a battlefield. "Who did this?" he finally asked, voice low, lethal. "Sheriff Roy Hensley," Aaliyah said, "and his deputy, Lena Carver, was there too." Marcus nodded once, filing the names away like targets on a list. He stood pacing to the window, peering through the blinds where the mist still clung to the trees. "Tamara, head to work. Don't want you late," he said, gentle but firm. "Aaliyah, you're staying home today." She opened her mouth to protest. A history test loomed, but his look silenced her. "This ends now." After Tamara left, Marcus retreated to his study, the door clicking shut. Aaliyah caught snatches of muffled calls, code words, clipped orders, names she didn't know. By noon he emerged dressed in civilian black, but moving with military precision. "I'm going out," he said, slipping a small device into his pocket. Cameras, she realized, the kind he'd once shown her for special jobs. "Where?" she asked. "To have a conversation," he replied, his smile tight, dangerous. As his truck rumbled down the drive, Aaliyah knew this was no ordinary talk. Roy Hensley had woken a sleeping giant, and Laurel Creek would feel the tremors soon. The Laurel Creek Sheriff's Office sat squat and unassuming at the edge of town, a low brick building flanked by patrol cars and a flag snapping in the spring breeze. Marcus Jackson pulled his truck into the lot just past noon, his boots hitting the asphalt with a measured thud. He'd spent the morning rigging tiny cameras around the house, military-grade, discreet, each lens a silent sentinel against Roy Hensley's creeping shadow. Now, dressed in a black jacket and jeans, he moved with the calm precision of a man who'd walked into worse than this and come out the other side. Inside, the air smelled of stale coffee and bureaucracy. A young deputy at the desk glanced up, his eyes widening slightly at Marcus's imposing frame. "Here to see Sheriff Hensley," Marcus said, voice flat. "Colonel Marcus Jackson." The deputy stammered, then buzzed the back. Roy emerged from a hallway minutes later, his uniform crisp, a smirk tugging at his thick features. "Colonel Jackson," he said, offering a hand Marcus ignored. "What brings a big-shot soldier to my little station?" Marcus didn't blink, his gaze locking onto Roy's like a laser. "My daughter says you've been harassing her," he said, each word deliberate, heavy. "Poured water on her head, stalked her home. That sound familiar?" Roy's smirk widened, but a flicker of unease danced in his small eyes. He leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. "Kids exaggerate, Colonel. Aaliyah's been stirring trouble, disrespecting my nephew, starting fights. I was just keeping the peace." Marcus stepped closer, towering over him, his voice dropping to a whisper that carried more threat than a shout. "Pouring water on a teenage girl isn't peacekeeping, Hensley. It's cowardice." The room stilled, the deputy frozen, Roy's bravado teetering on a knife's edge. Roy's jaw tightened, his hand twitching toward his belt as Marcus's words hung in the air like smoke before a fire. "You threatening me, soldier boy?" he snapped, voice rising to reclaim control. "I'm the law here. You're just some washed-up vet who's been gone too long." Marcus didn't flinch, his calm unshaken. "I've seen war, Hensley. You don't scare me. Stay away from my family or you'll find out what I'm capable of." Before Roy could retort, Marcus's phone buzzed in his pocket, a sharp trill cutting through the tension. He stepped back, pulling it out, his eyes never leaving Roy's. "Yeah?" he said, voice low. A gravelly whisper crackled through. "It's Clara. I've got more on him. Meet me tonight." Marcus's lips twitched, the faintest hint of a smile Roy couldn't read. He pocketed the phone, turning for the door. "This ain't over, Jackson," Roy called, his bravado hollow. Outside, Marcus climbed into his truck, the call from Miss Clara replaying in his mind. More evidence, another piece to bury Roy. But as he started the engine, movement caught his eye. Deputy Lena Carver lingered by the station's side door, watching him with a frown, her fingers drumming against her holster. She'd been there on Oak Road, a silent witness to Roy's cruelty. Marcus filed that away, a crack in the sheriff's armor he'd exploit later. Back home, Aaliyah met him at the door, her eyes searching his. "What happened?" she asked. "Told him to back off," Marcus said, setting his keys down. "He won't. Not yet." He pulled out a small recorder, clicking it on. Roy's voice, smug and taunting, filled the room from their clash. "We're building a case," he said, meeting her gaze. "Next time he moves, we'll be ready." Darkness draped Laurel Creek like a heavy curtain as midnight ticked closer, the town's usual hum silenced by the late hour. Inside the Jackson home, Aaliyah lay awake, the glow of her phone screen casting shadows across her tense face. Marcus's cameras had caught Roy's cruiser circling again that evening, closer this time, its headlights off like a thief in the night. She'd watched her dad set traps all day, motion sensors, hidden mics, his movements swift and silent. A soldier back in his element. Now the house felt like a fortress, but the air buzzed with waiting. Downstairs, Marcus sat in the dark, eyes on a tablet streaming live feeds, his jaw tight. Tamara slept fitfully, unaware of the storm brewing. Then it came, a low rumble, tires on gravel, followed by the sharp crack of boots on the porch. Marcus's voice cut through the quiet, urgent but calm. Aaliyah, Tamara, basement, now. Aaliyah bolted upright, grabbing her mom's arm as they stumbled down the stairs to the safe room Marcus had built years ago, a concrete box disguised as a storm shelter. Inside, they locked the steel door, a monitor flickering to life with feeds from above. Aaliyah's breath hitched as 6 figures stormed in, led by Roy Hensley, his flashlight slicing through the living room. Police! He bellowed, waving a paper. A fake warrant, Marcus had warned her. His men fanned out, boots stomping, drawers crashing open, glass shattered in the kitchen. A photo frame, Aaliyah realized, her chest tightening. Roy's voice echoed down the basement stairs, taunting. I'll make that girl beg me to stop. The words hit like a punch, but Aaliyah pressed record on her phone, hidden under the table, capturing every threat, every crash. Marcus had let them in. She knew. This was his trap snapping shut. The raid tore through the Jackson home like a tornado, 30 minutes of calculated chaos. Upstairs, Roy's men ripped cushions, overturned shelves, their laughter mixing with the clatter of broken dishes. Aaliyah watched the monitor, her hands trembling as she held the phone, its red light blinking steadily, proof streaming to a secure server Marcus had set up that afternoon. Tamara gripped her shoulder, whispering, He's got this, baby, though her voice shook. On screen, Roy prowled toward the basement door, his flashlight sweeping the steps. Aaliyah, come out, he sang, his tone dripping with menace. You scared yet? She didn't answer, didn't breathe, her resolve hardening with every word he fed her trap. Above, Marcus stayed silent, a ghost in his own house, letting Roy dig deeper. When the sheriff finally tired of his game, he stormed out, leaving a parting shot. Tell your girl this is just the start. The cruisers peeled away, their engines fading into the night. Marcus texted Aaliyah, safe now, and she emerged with Tamara, stepping into a war zone. Furniture smashed, family photos in shards. Marcus met them, his face a mask, but a muscle twitched in his jaw, fury held on a leash. Show me the recording, he said, voice low. Aaliyah played it, Roy's threats, his glee at the destruction, all crystal clear. Marcus nodded, then vanished into the basement, locking a small back room behind him. A heavy click echoed, a sound Aaliyah knew meant more than a door closing. Tamara hugged her tight, tears spilling. What's he doing? Aaliyah asked. Planning, Tamara said, her voice grim, like only he can. Downstairs, Marcus was already on a secure line, calling in his old team. Roy had crossed a line, and the reckoning was coming fast. Dawn crept over Laurel Creek, pale light filtering through the shattered blinds of the Jackson home, illuminating the wreckage Roy Hensley had left behind. Marcus stood in the kitchen, brewing coffee with mechanical precision, his mind already 3 steps ahead. The night's raid had been a declaration of war, and he'd spent hours in the basement, pulling gear from a locked footlocker, comms, surveillance tools, relics of his Green Beret days. Aaliyah shuffled in, her eyes red from sleeplessness, the recording of Roy's threats still looping in her head. You okay, Firefly? Marcus asked, sliding her a mug. She nodded, clutching it. Just want him gone. He squeezed her shoulder, a silent promise, then grabbed his keys. Stay here. I've got to meet. By mid-morning, Marcus parked near the old mill off Cumberland Road, its rusted skeleton a relic of Laurel Creek's past. Miss Clara Thompson waited on a splintered bench, her shawl pulled tight against the chill. She handed him a flash drive, her voice steady despite her frail frame. More than just that water video, she said. Reports I kept. Finds Roy forced on folks like me, back when he was a deputy. He's been rotten a long time. Marcus pocketed it, his jaw tight. Why now, Clara? Her eyes flashed. Saw him break too many. Your girl's my chance to fix it. He nodded, respect flickering. Another soldier in this fight. As Clara left, tires crunched gravel behind him. 2 black SUVs rolled up, disgorging 4 men, his old team, faces weathered but sharp, duffels slung over shoulders. Ramirez, the tech whiz, grinned. Heard you needed us, Colonel. Marcus clasped his hand. Unofficial, domestic. Hensley's mine. The air crackled with purpose. Roy's reckoning had just gained teeth. Back at the house, Aaliyah watched from the porch as Marcus led his team inside, their boots echoing like a drumbeat of war. She'd never seen them before. Ramirez with his quick grin, Wilson's quiet intensity, Thomas and Lawson scanning the perimeter, but their presence felt like an extension of her dad, a living shield. Marcus ushered her to the basement, where maps and gear sprawled across a table. Meet the crew, he said, pride lacing his voice. Best I ever fought with. Wilson nodded at her. Heard you've been holding your own, kid. Respect. Aaliyah managed a small smile, the weight of the past days lifting slightly. Not well enough, she said. They're still out there. Thomas chuckled. Not for long. Upstairs, Tamara bustled in from her shift, pausing at the sight of the soldiers. Marcus, what's this? She asked, worry creasing her brow. Back up, he replied, kissing her forehead. We end this soon. As the team plotted, a shadow moved outside. Deputy Lena Carver parked a block away, her cruiser half hidden by pines. She'd overheard Roy that morning, ranting to a lackey about finishing the Jacksons for good. Her stomach had twisted, loyalty to the badge clashing with the rot she'd ignored too long. Now she watched Marcus's men, her fingers drumming the wheel, doubt gnawing at her. Inside, Marcus briefed his crew. Hensley's escalating. We've got Clara's dirt, Aaliyah's recording, enough to start. Next move's his, and we'll be waiting. Aaliyah caught his eye, feeling the shift. This wasn't just defense anymore. It was a hunt. As night fell, the team dispersed to set traps around town, leaving Marcus to tweak a camera feed. Aaliyah knew Roy wouldn't see it coming, not yet, but the noose was tightening, and she'd be the bait to cinch it. Rain streaked the windows of the Jackson home as Thursday evening settled over Laurel Creek, the Cumberland River swollen and restless beyond the town's edge. Marcus gathered his team in the basement, maps pinned to the wall, their plan taking shape like a noose. Aaliyah's the bait, he said, his voice steady but his eyes flicking to her with a father's hesitation. She'll draw Hensley to the old warehouse by the river. Abandoned, isolated. He won't resist. Aaliyah nodded, her hands steady despite the pulse hammering in her throat. I'm in, she said. What's the play? Ramirez rigged her with a concealed mic, while Wilson handed her a panic button. Press this. We're there in 10 seconds, he said. She slipped it into her pocket, feeling the weight of trust. By 7 p.m., Aaliyah sat alone on a rusted crate in the warehouse, its cavernous shell echoing with the drip of rain through a broken roof. Marcus had leaked a tip, anonymous, urgent, that she'd be meeting a witness with dirt on Roy. The trap was set, his team hidden in the shadows. Wilson at the north exit, Thomas south, Lawson and Ramirez on comms with thermal scopes. Marcus crouched behind a stack of pallets, his breath slow, controlled. Aaliyah's earpiece crackled. Marcus's voice. He's moving? 3 cruisers, ETA 5 minutes. She adjusted her posture, feigning calm, though her mind raced. Headlights pierced the gloom outside, engines growling as doors slammed. Roy burst in, flanked by 4 deputies, his flashlight pinning her in its beam. Well, Aaliyah Jackson, he sneered, striding closer, his men spreading out. Meeting someone with evidence, huh? Where's your snitch? She stood, voice level. Couldn't make it, just me. Roy's grin widened, predatory. He thought he'd won, blind to the jaws closing around him. Roy's boots echoed on the concrete as he closed the gap, his deputies forming a loose ring around Aaliyah, their flashlights slashing through the warehouse's dark corners. You really thought you could play me? He laughed, hand resting on his gun. A little girl against the sheriff? Aaliyah met his gaze, unflinching. I thought I'd do what's right. His amusement twisted into fury, and he lunged forward, intent clear. Then the lights cut out, plunging the space into pitch black. Panicked shouts erupted, beams swinging wildly. What the hell? One deputy yelped. From the void, Marcus's voice boomed, deep and commanding. Wrong move, Hensley! Emergency lights flickered on, bathing the scene in red, revealing his team encircling Roy's men, Non-lethal tasers drawn, faces grim. Roy spun, gun raised, but froze as Deputy Lena Carver stepped from the shadows, her weapon aimed not at Aaliyah, but at him. "Enough, Roy," she shouted, voice cracking with months of buried guilt. "I won't sink with you." His eyes widened, betrayal cutting deeper than any trap. Marcus emerged, towering in the crimson glow. "No warrant, no jurisdiction," he said. "Just you, breaking laws on tape." Aaliyah pulled her phone, playing Roy's recorded threats from the raid, his own voice damning him. "That's just the start," Marcus added. "Clara's files, bribes, shakedowns, we've got it all." Roy's bravado crumbled, his gun lowering as his men backed away, sensing the tide turn. "You've got nothing," he bluffed, voice hollow. Marcus smiled, cold and final. 24 hours. Turn yourself in, or this goes public. FBI, media, all of it." Roy glared, defeated but defiant, retreating with his rattled crew. Aaliyah exhaled, meeting her dad's eyes. The trap had sprung. Roy was cornered, and the fall was coming fast. Morning broke over Laurel Creek with a brittle clarity, the rain from the night before leaving the air sharp and clean. Inside the Jackson home, Marcus sat at the kitchen table, laptop open, his team's evidence. Clara's files, Aaliyah's recordings, warehouse footage, compiled into a digital dagger aimed at Roy Hensley's heart. Aaliyah hovered nearby, watching as Ramirez sent the first wave, the Oak Road video to 3 local news stations. By 8 a.m., screens across town flickered with Roy pouring water over her, his smirk undeniable. The phone rang non-stop, reporters, neighbors, until Tamara unplugged it, her hands trembling. "It's working," Marcus said, voice steady. "He's got hours left before we drop the rest." Aaliyah nodded, relief warring with the ache of reliving that day. Outside, Roy's world unraveled fast. Marcus's surveillance tracked him fleeing his house in civilian clothes, his cruiser abandoned, driving erratic loops through town. He stormed the station, only to be turned away by his own captain, a man now scrambling to distance himself. By noon, the financial records hit the state attorney general's inbox, bribes from local businesses, siphoned funds, followed by Clara's testimony to the FBI. Roy's phone logs showed desperate calls, to his captain, the mayor, all unanswered. At school, Aaliyah's absence left a void filled with whispers. Zoe texted her, "Cody's a ghost now. Nobody's talking to him." Tamara pulled Aaliyah close on the couch, tears spilling as the news replayed Roy's humiliation. "You're stronger than I ever knew," she whispered, her voice thick. Marcus glanced at them, pride flickering, but his focus stayed razor sharp. Roy was cracking, his empire crumbling under the weight of truth, and every panicked move he made tightened the noose Marcus had set. The sheriff's fall was no longer a question of if, just how hard he'd hit bottom. By afternoon, Roy's desperation turned frantic. Marcus's team hacked school security feeds, catching him yanking Cody from class in the parking lot, his grip bruising. "You started this!" Roy roared, voice cracking as Ramirez piped the audio through a speaker. "If you hadn't messed with that girl..." Cody jerked free, face pale. "You're the one who lost it. Breaking into their house wasn't me." Roy raised a hand, then froze as Cody flinched, a crowd of students gaping from the windows. "Everyone knows what you did," Cody spat, voice breaking. "Mom's a wreck. Dad won't speak to me. It's all over." Roy stormed off, leaving Cody alone, his shoulders slumping under a weight he'd never carried before. Aaliyah watched the feed, a flicker of pity cutting through her anger. "He's broken," she said softly. Marcus studied her. "What about him?" She hesitated. "He's just a kid who picked the wrong hero." Back home, the news escalated. Roy's face plastered across every channel, labeled a disgrace. Tamara cooked dinner, a rare calm settling as the team monitored his next move. A failed plea to the mayor, who shut him out cold. "He's got no allies left," Wilson noted, sipping coffee. Marcus nodded. "Good. He'll either run or fight. Either way, we've got him." Aaliyah sat with her mom, the warmth of the kitchen a stark contrast to the chaos outside. "I thought he'd break me," she admitted, voice small. Tamara hugged her tighter. He didn't know who he was up against. As night fell, Roy's cruiser rolled past their house one last time, slower now, a wounded animal circling its end. Marcus watched the feed, eyes narrowing. Roy was cornered, but cornered men lash out, and Aaliyah's testimony would soon seal his fate in court. The Laurel Creek courthouse loomed under a slate-gray sky, its stone facade a silent witness to the town's reckoning. Inside, the preliminary hearing buzzed with tension. State police lined the halls, reporters jostled for sound bites, and Aaliyah Jackson sat in a wooden chair, her hands folded tight to still their trembling. Marcus and Tamara flanked her in the front row, a wall of strength, while Roy Hensley slumped at the defense table, his orange jumpsuit a stark fall from his sheriff's badge. The past weeks had gutted him, his empire exposed, allies fled, but his glare still burned, fixed on Aaliyah as she was called to the stand. She took the oath, her voice steady, eyes locking briefly with his, unflinching. "Miss Jackson," the prosecutor began, "tell us about September 15th. Your first encounter with Mr. Hensley." Aaliyah drew a breath, the memory sharp as glass. She recounted it all, Roy's water assault on Oak Road, the nightly prowls, the raid that trashed her home. Her words clear, unembellished, each one a hammer strike. The jury shifted, some wincing as she described Roy's taunt. "I'll make her beg me to stop," during the break-in. "Were you afraid?" the prosecutor asked. "Yes," she said, honest but firm. "Not just for me, for what it meant if he could do this and walk away. For folks without my dad's training, who'd never be heard." Marcus's jaw tightened, pride mingling with fury, while Tamara gripped his hand. Aaliyah's testimony stretched beyond her story. Roy wasn't just a bully. He was a symptom of a system gone rotten. The courtroom hushed, the weight of her truth sinking in, every eye on the girl who'd turned fear into a weapon. Roy's lawyer rose for the cross-examination, his tone slick but cautious. "Miss Jackson, couldn't you have misread Mr. Hensley's actions? Maybe he was just doing his job?" Aaliyah leaned forward, voice cutting through the room. "Is it a sheriff's job to drench a kid in water, stalk her house, break in without a warrant? If that's his duty, the law's broken." The lawyer faltered, his questions fizzling under her steady gaze, and retreated after a weak attempt. Then came the shock. Cody Hensley's name echoed as he was called next. The room buzzed as he shuffled to the stand, head down, avoiding Roy's venomous stare. "I saw it all," Cody said, voice cracking. "The lies he spread about Aaliyah, the raid he planned, I heard him laugh about it." Gas rippled through. Roy's face drained, betrayal slicing deeper than any evidence. Aaliyah watched, stunned. Cody, the spark of this nightmare, now dousing his uncle's flames. "He told me power was everything," Cody added, "but he was wrong." The judge's gavel fell, ordering Roy to stand trial on felony counts, his fate sealed. As Aaliyah stepped down, Roy leaned forward, his whisper venomous. "This ain't over, girl." She paused, meeting his eyes. "Yes, it is." Outside, the crowd pressed, reporters shouting, citizens clapping. But Marcus guided her through, a shield. Miss Clara emerged, tears in her eyes, pressing Aaliyah's hand. "You did it, child." Cody lingered at the lot's edge, nodding once as their gazes met. Not friendship, but amends. Back home, Marcus pulled Aaliyah aside. "He's down, but his kind don't quit easy. Stay sharp." She nodded, the victory bittersweet. Roy was caged, yet his shadow lingered, a final fight brewing in Laurel Creek's quiet corners. Spring unfurled over Laurel Creek in the weeks after Roy Hensley's hearing, a tentative renewal blooming amidst the scars he'd left. Aaliyah returned to school under a shifted sky. Students who'd once whispered now nodded with quiet respect, their eyes tracing her path to a locker freshly painted over its vandalized past. The town buzzed with change. A new sheriff took the helm, promising reform, while council meetings swelled with voices demanding oversight. Marcus declined offers to consult elsewhere, staying home to mend what Roy had broken. Aaliyah sat with him one evening, college essays open on her laptop. Pre-law, a seed planted by fire. "Georgetown?" he asked, glancing at her screen. She smiled. "Maybe. I want to fix what's broken, like you. His nod carried pride. A torch passed. At school, the student council pinned a flyer, a forum on civil rights, Aaliyah's name in bold as a speaker. Principal Morton, new and earnest, caught her in the hall. Your voice could shape this, she urged. Aaliyah hesitated. Public stages weren't her fight, but agreed, the weight of her stand pulling her forward. Zoe met her at lunch, breathless. Cody's back. He's a shadow now. No posse, no swagger. Aaliyah spotted him later, alone by the gym, his shoulders hunched. Their eyes met. He looked away, guilt a silent tether. That night, Tamara cooked a rare family dinner, the kitchen warm as Marcus tweaked a camera feed. Habit, he said, though Roy was locked away. Think it's over? Aaliyah asked. Marcus shook his head. Men like him leave echoes. The words hung, prophetic, as a shadow flickered on the screen. 3 figures, dark-clad, creeping toward their yard. Roy's last loyalists, unbroken, hungry for revenge. Marcus's hand shot to his phone, texting Wilson and Lawson, still in town, shadows of his own. While Aaliyah watched the figures edge closer, lockpicks glinting in the moonlight. Basement, he ordered, voice clipped. Tamara grabbed her, practice now, as they slipped into the safe room, the monitor lighting up with feeds. Aaliyah recognized the leader, Deputy Peter Davis, Roy's right hand, uncaught until now. They want my testimony notes, she whispered, heart racing. Marcus stayed upstairs, night vision on, a predator in wait. The back door clicked open, Davis's voice hissing, find the girl's stuff, quick, no mess. His men split off, amateurs stumbling in the dark, blind to the trap. Outside, Wilson and Lawson closed in, silent as ghosts, while Lena Carver's cruiser screeched up the street, lights flashing. She'd tipped Marcus off hours ago. Davis's plan overheard in a bar, her conscience finally breaking free. Freeze! She shouted, gun drawn as Davis spun, caught mid-step. Marcus emerged, disarming him in a blur, zip-tying his wrists. Thought you'd finish Roy's work? He growled. Davis sneered. You can't stop us all. Sirens wailed. State police, summoned by Lena, hauling the trio away. Later, Miss Clara arrived, her frail hands pressing an old medal into Aaliyah's palm, a relic from her father, a soldier like Marcus. You're our hope, she said, tears shining. Aaliyah clutched it, the night's chaos fading into resolve. Laurel Creek slept, but the forum loomed, her chance to speak, to heal. Marcus watched her, eyes soft. One last fight tomorrow? She nodded, the metal warm in her hand. Roy's echo was fading, but her voice would rise, a beacon for a town remade, its wounds stitching shut under her steady gaze. The full moon hung heavy over Laurel Creek, its silver light spilling across the Cumberland River, a quiet witness to the town's rebirth. Weeks after Davis's arrest, Roy Hensley's plea deal landed. 20 years, no parole for 10, his confession spilling names, from deputies to the mayor, crumbling the last of his rotten legacy. Aaliyah stood at the school auditorium's podium that Friday night, the Civil Rights Forum packed with faces, students, parents, even strangers from the hollows. Her voice steady as she spoke of justice born from pain. I didn't fight for me, she said, the medal from Clara glinting in her pocket. I fought for us, for the ones silenced too long. Applause rose, soft and thunderous, a tide of gratitude washing over her. Earlier that day, Marcus had gathered the family by the riverbank, a rare stillness settling over them. Pentagon called, he said, hands in his pockets. Strategic planning gig in D.C. We'd move next summer, after Aaliyah graduates. Tamara smiled, tentative but warm. What do you think, baby? Aaliyah glanced at the water, its ripples catching the moon. I say yes. Georgetown's waiting. Marcus grinned, pride etching his weathered face. Now, as she stepped off the stage, Zoe rushed her with a hug, whispering, You changed everything. Cody lingered at the back, his eyes meeting hers. Not the bully she'd flipped, but a kid remade by ruin. He approached, hesitant. I'm staying, he said, voice low. Gonna help fix this place. What you said up there, it's right. Aaliyah nodded, a truce unspoken, their paths diverging yet aligned. The crowd parted and she joined her parents outside, the night air cool, the weight of months lifting like mist off the river. Marcus led Aaliyah and Tamara back to the riverbank, a paper lantern in his hands, a fragile glow against the vast night. "One last thing before we go," he said, his voice soft but firm. He lit the wick, the flame dancing as he handed it to Aaliyah. "For everything you've carried, let it go." She took it, her fingers brushing the warm paper, memories flashing. Roy's water, the raid's chaos, the courtroom's glare. The lantern trembled, then steadied as she stepped to the water's edge. "This isn't just for me," she whispered, glancing at her parents. "It's for Clara, for Lena, for everyone he hurt." She released it, the light lifting skyward, a beacon cutting through the dark, drifting high above the Cumberland's gentle current. Tamara slipped an arm around her, tears glinting in the moonlight, while Marcus stood tall, his silhouette a quiet sentinel. "They thought they'd break you," he said, echoing words from months ago. "But they didn't know my firefly." Aaliyah smiled, the lantern fading into the stars, its glow a silent vow. Freedom, not just from Roy, but from fear itself. Laurel Creek lay quiet behind them, its wounds healing, its people rising from the ashes of corruption. She'd sparked that change, a girl who'd stood when the world pushed back, her voice now a flame others would carry. As they walked home, the moon bathed the town in silver, a new chapter dawning. D.C. ahead, a future to shape. Aaliyah paused, looking back one last time, the river whispering peace. Roy's war had ended. Hers had forged something stronger. Hope, unyielding, lighting the way for a town, a family, a girl who'd learned justice wasn't given, but claimed.